Hey, welcome to Lone Star Legacy episode 11. I'm pretty sure we've had trouble keeping track of our episode numbers. This is Stu. You've heard me on here before. And we were planning originally to do an episode recapping the vintage and old school portion of Eternal Weekend, but the stars never really aligned and we didn't get it together. So I guess we're just skipping that and moving ahead with our lives. Tonight, I am drinking a Shiner Cheer that I had left over from the Thanksgiving holiday. Yeah, those weren't super popular with the group here. And I'm joined by Mike O'Malley, who you guys have met before, and
Hey guys.
Johnny Angulo.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Yeah, if you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves, I guess, Mike, if you want to go first.
Sure. So yeah, it's been a little while since I've been on this cast. But yeah, my name is Mike. I live in Austin. I am a primarily legacy player. I do kind of sometimes play Pauper, and I'm starting to get into vintage, but only proxy. And I am drinking a Austin Beer Works Bloodwork Orange because I just love those IPAs with the citrusy, rindy, grapefruity flavor.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Yeah, the Bloodwork Orange is really solid. I'm a fan. And then, yeah, Johnny Angulo.
Yeah, Johnny, thanks for having me, man. It's going to be a lot of fun for the podcast. I'm currently drinking a Monster Mango Loco. It's the new art on it. It's just a really heavy mango flavored Monster energy drink. I'm a real big energy drink guy.
Okay.
I also play mainly Legacy. I'll play Modern for the most part. When I get the chance or when something needs to fire around town and I happen to be in the building. But I mainly stick to like a white weenie shell with anything of Modern. I also play Pauper and Legacy.
Cool. Yeah, so tonight I think what we're hoping to do is talk about sort of Knight of the Reliquary decks and their place in Legacy. And I would imagine in particular there might be a bit of an emphasis on Maverick. I play Maverick, Johnny plays Maverick, and Mike has played Maverick in the past. So I think we just want to kind of talk about the deck and where it stands right now and our thoughts on it. Before we dive into our discussion of it, I'd like to preface this by saying that anyone who's interested in this topic should also check out the Tusk Talk episode on Maverick, which they did, I think, last year. It was a very different meta because Miracles existed at the time, but I think a lot of their discussion is still relevant. So it's a good intro to the deck for anyone interested in it.
That's a good podcast. I haven't listened to it in a while, but yeah, I can second that recommendation. It's usually pretty entertaining, and they're pretty good with their analysis and perspectives.
Yeah, they're all really good players, at least the ones I've met, and like they're cool dudes. I know a couple of them from big events at this point, and I think on average, Tusks are better Magic players than Goyfs are, unfortunately. But we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. Yeah, so like I said, Johnny and I both play Maverick. Nowadays, Mike is playing Agrolome, so I think a lot of this discussion is probably going to go through that filter. There are some other cool Knight decks out there. The first one that comes to mind to me would be like the Reliquary Retreat deck, like what Brave Sir Robin is another name for it. It's basically like Bant combo Knight.
Yeah, the deck is spicy.
But Return to Coralhelm is that like it's that blue enchantment that like we should just get the text here.
Yeah, it's a blue enchantment that says whenever it has landfall, whenever land went into the battlefield, you could either scry one or have to untap or tap a target creature.
Yeah, so you can just like activate your Knight, get a land, untap your Knight, and just rinse and repeat indefinitely, right? And I think there's that makes an arbitrarily, well, I guess it's not arbitrary because it's the number of lands in your deck, but it's going to make a lethal Knight, and you also get whatever you want. So that's a sweet deck, but a little less common. So yeah, like I said, a lot of this is going to be filtered through Maverick and Agrolome as our emphasis here. I guess starting off, if we want to talk about how we each came to be on a Knight of the Reliquary deck, I think that'd be good. Johnny, do you want to talk a bit about how you got on Maverick and kind of what you like about the deck?
Yeah, so I originally started playing back in 2004, and my first format was Modern, and I played like a white weenie shells. Terrible deck. And then my friends kind of brought me back into, because I'm from a small town, so my friends kind of brought me into Legacy. We kind of just all played Proxy Legacy, and I tried to jam a White Weenie, but I didn't want to play Death and Taxes. It didn't really seem that interesting to me because I never really liked the interaction between like having to Rashad import and having to keep up, certain types of mana for certain things, and playing around with Flicker Wisp and Flicker Wisping the wrong target because I was terrible at the time. So I pretty much came down to playing Maverick because I liked playing White Weenies for the most part. And whenever I found that you could have utility in a White Weenie shell, it kind of turned me onto the deck. And so that's what I sleeved up. And then over time, I proxied that up. And then eventually started, getting pieces for the deck, and then got more serious about it and started building the dual lands, getting the dual lands and stuff like that. After probably 3 or 4 months of just playtesting with other different types of decks, but I kind of just always have been a White Weenie kind of player, so that kind of drew me towards playing more fair, like I would say like more of like an attrition game, but it doesn't even have more of an attrition. It's just like a very fair like utility creature deck.
For sure. Yeah,
and that's what kind of drew me towards that.
Yeah, so you said you got into Magic in like 2004. Do you have like a guess of when you got on a Maverick then?
I guess at the time it was like, I honestly don't know. We just bounced around between playing so much different stuff.
Yeah.
And then I always just had it proxied up, and then we would have cool stuff that was like from Fauna Shaman to coming more in depth with like kind of newer stuff. We had Green Sun Zenith is what really put it over the top, on top of like Thalia, which made it very good. And kind of just as cards got better, green, creatures got better, and then other types of colors got worse, so they had to print better, so they had to print better creatures, and so on and so forth. And it pretty much came down to having the shell that I do now. I don't really know the exact, shell I had back in the day. It was probably just Nut of the Reliquaries, Qasali Pride Mages, Noble Hierarchs, Mother of Runes. So all that kind of era was a good year for Maverick, because that's when they printed all these really big hitters for the deck, and specifically green and white. Shards of Alara and Conflicts era, that's when it really kind of drew it together. And then, like I said, whenever Green Sun Zenith was printed, it kind of put it over the top, especially with Thalia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked just because I've only been on the deck for a little over 6 months, or maybe a bit longer than that. But so I have a sense of kind of the history of the deck from what I've read basically on the internet, but I wasn't like playing it when the deck was first being put together and devised. So it's kind of cool that you've been, in it for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much just came down to me having what could I have the most fun with at the time, because it was all proxy for us at the time. We were, younger, and I didn't have that much money, but it pretty much came down to like what could I have the most fun with, and it kind of always drew me back. I played from like Reanimator, I played with Death and Taxes, I played with the old Miracles deck to the old Rug control decks. I played and dabbled, and we had all of it proxied up, and then I always just had more fun playing Maverick than I did anything else. So that's what kind of drew me more to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Mike? When did you kind of get into the Maverick train?
So I played Magic first when I was like a teenager. That was probably like, I don't know, 2004, 2005. So that's about the same era that Johnny maybe was playing. But I also didn't really have very much money, so I didn't have much in the way of cards. And I kind of only played for a couple of years, and I sort of like forgot about the game. But then when I was in college, living in Chicago, I just kind of I had a roommate who had used to be a really good Magic player. He played on like the Junior Super Series or whatever it was called. And he was at that point like an online poker player, but he still liked to talk about Magic and play a little bit. So I kind of got back into it then. I had my mom send me my old cards, and I had kept everything from when I was a teenager, and I had like 2 Wastelands, a playset of Windswept Heaths from Onslaught, and I don't know, I had a few other things, but really like kind of only a few cards that were really like kind of increase in value. But I was like, I want to get into like an Eternal format, because I played Standard for a little bit, and I was just didn't really. I mean, it was okay, but I was like, man, I really don't have very much money right now. Like, I can't afford to buy a new deck every 8 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, I did take kind of a break in there when I was living in Chicago. So that must have been like 2008, 2009 time. Um, and I didn't really think about playing Eternal formats. But I started playing again maybe 2012. And that time I decided, okay, I want to play Eternal. So initially I started looking at Modern because I was like, oh, well, it seems like it'd probably be a little cheaper because I was looked at Duel and price and I was like, man, I really don't make very much money. I can't buy those.
Yeah.
And at that time in Modern, one of the top decks was the Birthing Pod, kind of Melira.
Yep.
What are those creatures called? The Kitchen Finks and the Murderous Redcap combo with Viscera Seer and stuff like that. So I ended up buying I just started buying like all sorts of toolboxy cards for Birthing Pod. And I ended up with copies of Gaddock Teeg, Sully Pride Mage. I think I had when I played Standard a few years before, I acquired some fetch lands as well. But basically, I ended up collecting a whole bunch of Hate Bears and kind of just toolboxy style creatures that do all kinds of stuff. But I think I played in one Modern tournament, and I was like, man, I don't like this. So then
that bias is stuck with you even today. Anytime I bring up Modern, you're
yeah. And I mean, I wasn't I wasn't studying the game very hard, so I probably could have stuck with it and it would have become more enjoyable. But the same store did every other week they did Modern or Legacy. So I was like, well, that was kind of underwhelming. So I went online and I bought all the cards for Manaless Dredge because that was $150 or something like that at the time. It was very cheap. And then I played in the Legacy tournament the next week or the next 2 weeks or whenever it was. And I was like, oh man, that format was awesome. Even though Manaless Dredge isn't not really a real Legacy deck, but I still got to see kind of tour the format. But then I moved to Austin, and one of the things was got to find the Magic scene. Luckily, I lucked out, and there's a great Magic scene here. And I sort of started just buying some cards here and there, completed my Wasteland sets. I traded Misty Rainforest for Liliana's, just some other kind of random stuff. And I was playing kind of a junk Stoneblade deck. And then eventually I just sort of kind of through trading and buying cards here and there, ended up with kind of a standard Green Sun Zenith Maverick list. And I played that for almost a year. And I mean, it was just great. I just love the deck, the versatility, the power level. It's just super fun. All the interactions are just great. But it's sort of a roundabout path for me to get to casting Green Sun Zenith. But it's one of my favorite things to do in Magic. It's just what is he gonna get? Is he faking me out with his X number? Who knows?
Well, it's a really cool alternative. Not to kind of skip too far ahead in our discussion, but it's a cool alternative in a format that's very much defined by things like Ponder and Brainstorm as consistency tools. It's a very different way of having that.
Well, it's a non-blue deck, aka it's a cheap deck by Legacy standards. Because you don't have to spend $1,500 on your mana base. It's probably more like 800, which is I mean that's half off roughly. But that's sort of been a theme of my experience in Legacy is I just really haven't gotten into blue. And I'm planning on doing so soon, but it just costs so much. And I'm saving. We'll get there.
No, for sure. And not to dwell too long on sort of your experiences, Mike, but my sense when I moved to Austin, I think you were on a temporary hiatus from Magic, which had to do with a specific Delve card printed.
Oh yeah, that was a dark time.
Yeah. Yeah, talk to us a bit about that. I think in a bit we're going to delve further into kind of what's happened to these night decks during different kind of recent eras of Legacy. But for you, my sense is you kind of felt like you'd hit a wall with Maverick, and yeah, go ahead if you want to talk a bit about
I mean,
the era.
It was just so demoralizing to be sitting across the table from someone who they hold up probably 3 mana during your turn, and if they didn't spend it to cast a counter spell on something you're trying to do, they would just spend it to basically draw 2 cards, choose which 2 cards to draw, and draw them for 2 mana by casting Dig Through Time. This is, of course, after the Treasure Cruise ban. The Treasure Cruise time was actually not so bad because Maverick actually had decent game against the, at least in my opinion,
the blue red Delver decks. Yeah,
I thought it was definitely a winnable matchup, although that deck was pretty freaking ridiculous. But the Dig Through Time decks, once Treasure Cruise got banned, aka basically just Miracles and then like some kind of random brews, at least in the local meta, were just so much more well suited to beat Maverick for a number of reasons. It was just like kind of a not very fun time to be kind of, casting Mana Dorks, then casting Hate Bears, and then casting like a big threat. Like,
well, it's interesting because kind of the like quintessential deck of Dig Through Time being legal was Omnitail, and in the current iteration, like Sneak and Show decks are pretty easily manageable when you're Maverick, but if they can make it Omniscience, it's just kind of miserable for you, and that was really what that deck was doing, and doing it very consistently.
Very consistently. It was because they could just, all they needed was the Omniscience, and then they could just chain digs. And find what they needed.
Yep, and like your Caracas Emrakul plan doesn't work anymore. So, so some people maybe would persevere through that or take a break. You took a break, but also wound up on a different Knight deck afterwards.
Yeah.
Right?
So at around that time, so this is actually still during the time when Dig was legal. I realized I was only like Chalice of the Voids and Mox Diamonds away from building Agrolome, which is it's a Chalice of the Void deck with Knight, kind of. You basically are trying to generate as much card advantage as possible through things like Dark Confidant, Punishing Fire, and Life from the Loam, all the while kind of using the utterly backbreaking card in Legacy, Chalice of the Void, which can shut down just huge swaths of the metagame if you can resolve it. And I just thought it always looked like a cool deck. Like I'd read the thread on the source about it at least a little bit, and ended up putting it together. And I really haven't looked back. I think it's a better deck than Maverick in the meta. It's a more powerful deck, but it's mainly more that I just have more fun playing it than I do playing Maverick. Even though I still like Maverick and I respect it, and still love the deck, I just like Agrolome more right now.
For sure. Yeah, and like I said, I came to Maverick earlier this year. A lot of what you guys were saying kind of resonated with me. Like when I originally played Magic, which was from like 98 to 04, one of the two decks I really loved was White Weenie, which I would play in Type 1. And I think that sort of general preference stuck with me when I got back into Magic a few years ago. I like playing fair decks. I had been playing whole bunch of different decks, and then when my wife and I were buying a car, I sold about half my Legacy collection, which included my Grixis Delver deck, which was like a fun deck to play. It had a lot of play to it and was like relatively fair. I mean, I guess like Daze and Stifle and stuff isn't that
and fair. True Name Nemesis.
I wasn't playing True Name.
Those are all still like fair cards in the sense that
I mean, there's still creatures. It's not like tendrils.
Right, exactly. It feels like a nightmare when your opponent has the like turn 1 Delver with Daze backup and wastes you and stifles you, but it is entirely fair what they're doing.
Yeah. So that's not like the nightmare. That is the nightmare. Go on.
So when I sold that deck, the decks I was left with were like Enchantress and Mud, which were fun, but like they're both not really operating on like a fair axis, and they also just like weren't good decks. So I was thinking about building into something fair, and I'd been considering D&T, but kind of like Johnny said, it didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't appeal to me that much. And I think also like this was at a time when D&T was sort of at peak popularity. Like it had the recent conspiracy printings, and everyone was playing it, so I didn't want to be like just another D&T player. But I had like an extra playset of Wastelands and Thalias, and so I was looking in that realm and landed on Maverick eventually. Which I lucked out. I finished building the deck like 3 weeks before Top got banned. So I played it for I played it for a few weeks and like got crushed by some local Miracles players, and then their deck disappeared, it kind of got better ever since.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've like really enjoyed the deck. I think Knight has a lot of play to it, and the deck in general just has lots of play, and it also just has like a lot of really high quality 3-drops that I enjoy slamming. So
yeah, for sure.
So that's kind of where we're all coming from. In turn, what I think we'd like to do, to the extent that any of us are knowledgeable about it, is talk a bit about sort of the history of Maverick. Specifically, I think as a starting point, if we want to talk about really what the deck was designed to do. My impression is that a lot of the deck was based around beating Rug Delver. There was a period in time when Rug was like the best deck in Legacy, and this would sort of be a foil to it.
So that's like part of the history of like of an era of Legacy, but this is just me looking at. There's like somebody actually I guess made a new primer on the source for Maverick.
Yeah, it's great.
Maverick 2.0.
It's great. I saw that.
And he talks a little bit about in the first page, the first couple of paragraphs about the genesis. And he says that originally it was an Ether Vial based deck that featured Weathered Wayfarer as like the toolbox generator, toolbox like kind of enabler. But I mean, besides that, I mean, I can click on these links and go try to find the deck lists. Let's see if I guess I'll see if I can find it. But I guess this was around 2010. So you had the Alara printings and Stoneforge Mystic plus the swords. I guess Batterskull isn't quite out yet, at least at the time of this list. This actually looks pretty close to what Maverick decks look like today, although it's definitely far slower than what we have now. Like, I don't know, I'll just give you guys the link here in the chat just so you can, if you want to, you can take a look.
Pull it up here. Yeah, and on the note of the idea of being like a vial deck or anything like that, today I think there's some relatively set tech. Like, for instance, Maverick is most commonly a Green Sun Zenith deck, but you do have options of building things like Vial Maverick or Living Wish Maverick.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just going through this list. Yeah, this isn't that far off from what we're doing now, but you're right, it does look a lot slower to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about Weathered Wayfarer is it's just like a very slow card to get online.
Yeah, and they're playing like Eternal Witness and 2 Scrib.
Because it's like you have to get the lands to your hand, so you play it turn 1, but you probably don't even play it turn 1 because you probably want to play a Dork or a Mom, ideally. And then, you have to wait a turn to tap it, and then the land goes to your hand. So, I mean, is there a specific land that you need off of it right now? Which is good, because you could, like, activate it and then go get your land. But otherwise, you might have already played the land that you wanted, and it's just like, I don't know. I've never actually experimented with the card, but I know Paul Gooch, I guess he used to play this deck, probably like in the very beginning of Legacy, or at least not the beginning, but in this era, because he was always talking about how he used to love Ether Vial and
Weathered Wayfarer. Yeah, because he said you would just play, 2 Cradles or 3 Cradles in the deck, and you would swarm the field, and then you would use like Wastelands, and then Scrib Ranger untap, Weathered Wayfarer, and then just get like insane card advantage between your lands, between like Horizon Canopies and Wastelands, and a certain amount of Cradles, Caracas, depending on what your matchup was and stuff like that. It was just very land toolbox style, as opposed to like I guess in some cases now it's more creature toolbox, but with some utility lands. But back in the day, you'd have like Sajiri Step, Treetop Village, Horizon Canopies, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love the Treetop Village in this list.
Yeah,
that's pretty sweet.
This is funny to me. This list also is running a playset of Birds of Paradise, when I would have assumed this would have been the time range when you would have been on Hierarch, but maybe not.
I
mean, they've got.
I don't see. Maybe that's because of the flying. Because maybe for some reason, I mean, I don't understand this deck in the context of the meta in which it was developed. But maybe like having 6 flyers in your deck was more important with like the equipment, because even though obviously it's a 0 power creature, if you throw a sword on that, all of a sudden you can win the game pretty quickly.
So I guess for listeners' sake, I'll read through this list quickly, because this conversation probably means nothing to anyone listening to it. All right, so this is White Green Maverick. There's 25 creatures, which is 2 Eternal Witness, which is pretty cool. 2 Scrib Ranger, which is a card that is still played nowadays, but usually this is a one of. 3 Mom, 3 Stoneforge, 3 Weathered Wayfarer, which, if listeners aren't familiar with it, it's 1 white for 1/1 Cleric. You can pay white and tap it and search your library for land and put it into your hand, but you can only do that if your opponent has more lands than you. 4 Birds, 4 Knight, and 4 Pride Mage. So going pretty heavy on Exalted, although, again, if they had had the Hierarch, it would have been very deep on Exalted.
Well, I think a feature of the metagame at this time was both, was it Survival of the Fittest and Countertop were both things, although the Countertop decks they didn't have miracles, so they were assemble Countertop Lock and then cast a Tarmogoyf and kill you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you wanted to, and also these decks didn't have Abrupt Decay, so they had to be a little more all in on creature-based artifact enchantment. Hey, because you could like probably try to cast the Pride Mage before the counterbalance comes down in order to have it ready.
Yeah, and you've also got, you have the 2 Eternal Witness, so you can buy them back too, so that's pretty reasonable. And then for non-creatures, they're playing 4 Plow, 3 Sylvan Library, which is pretty cool. That's
very strange.
Yeah.
I've never
It's very
seen
sluggish.
Yeah, he's just going for it. He's ready for the grind. And the equipment.
That's a dead card if you already have one. It's just
well, at least if you have one, you're not liable to get another.
Yeah, that's true.
The equipment package is 1 Sophie, 1 Sword of Light and Shadow, and 1 Jit. And then they've got 4 Vial. And for the lands, they have a Forest, a Cradle, a Caracas, a Plains, a Treetop Village, 4 Horizon Canopy, which is pretty deep, 4 Savannah, 4 Wasteland, and 4 Windswept Heath. And I won't bother getting into the board because it's probably pretty contextual. But
context really to understand it.
So it's interesting because on the one hand, a lot of this list looking through feels like crazy to me, and it's cool seeing the differences. But at the other, you're seeing pretty clearly, a lot of the what Maverick is now is based in this, and this is from 2010.
Yeah. You just swap out a couple of cards here and there. You put in some Green Sun Zenith.
The
stuff
thing
like
is,
that.
though,
And then you pretty much have a good Maverick deck. And I mean, it's pretty close to what the Maverick deck that I got pretty close to top 8ing, I believe, at Eternal Weekend here in 2017.
Yeah.
That guy's list was straight green-white. It looked kind of like the old Maverick deck. He threw in a couple of new cards like Palace Jailer and probably like some newer sideboard cards. I know he played like Blessed Alliance in the sideboard, which is an interesting call, but I feel like without having because he didn't play Death Rites in that list, so I feel like if you had stuff like that, it was pretty good to play against like Reanimator, Show and Tell, so you just didn't have like random dead cards like Source of Plowshares in certain cases.
Yeah, I mean...
So this deck was about 6 months out from the release of... And I misspoke earlier, thinking that the swords that are in it are from Mirrodin Scars block, but this was about 6 months out from the release of Scars block, which introduced
Feast and Famine and stuff.
Yeah, one of them, it introduced I think it wasn't until Mirrodin Besiege that things really got crazy, because that's when we got Green Sun Zenith. So this is, actually it's about a year out from Green Sun Zenith, which is when the deck would evolve again, probably. So
yeah, I mean, there's
some context there.
So like some hallmark cards from Contemporary Maverick that are missing in this would be Green Suns, and then Thalia is another big one.
Yep.
There's no Teague in this, but Teague would have been out at this point, right? He was in Lore.
He was in the sideboard.
Yep, he is in the board. There are 3 of them.
Again, that Teague is very meta. Like it just depends on the meta game, like how many you have and where you put them. And I don't understand the meta that this deck was developed in. I don't know anything about it, so I don't know what the decks would be that you're trying to shut down. It seems like there probably is a reason for it, but I think the decks you want to be beating, you don't need Gaddock Teague, aka probably the countertop decks that would
if the countertop decks aren't
tempo fresh.
If countertop isn't playing Terminus, and like Stoneblade wouldn't have really existed, right? Batter Skull.
Yeah, and there's no miracles.
Verdict, basically.
Planeswalkers were a thing though at this point, because if you have Stoneforge Mystic, you also have Jace the Mind Sculptor. But I don't know.
So this is kind of where the list was coming from, and those are some of the printings that would have come up in the the last few years, again, like Thalia and Green Suns, to my mind, are probably the biggest ones, although Deathrite is also a really important one.
Yeah.
And Abrupt Decay at the time was very important.
Yeah.
So the deck was one of the best in Legacy for quite a while. And then as we started to touch on, I think it ran into a bit of a wall for time. The Dig Through Time era wasn't very friendly to it. And likewise, during the Miracles era, I think that was kind of tough. It wasn't an unwinnable matchup, but Miracles
Once
was...
they got Dig Through Time, it started to get, at least in my, average level of skill opinion, pretty bad. I know there's good Maverick players who claim that, oh yeah, I can beat Miracles if I want to in Maverick, but it was like the percentages were just like, well, why aren't more people playing Maverick? Why aren't more people top 8ing in Maverick? I think some of that was because a lot of those players are just super spiky and they were just trying to be on the best deck, aka Miracles. But
yeah, I mean, it's one of the just interesting components about playing constructed Magic is that you can be really good at your deck and feel like you have positive matchups against a lot of the field, but if you have a bad matchup against the best deck in the format, things
it's going to be
really sketchy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So again, I don't know anything about the history of Agrolome, and maybe Mike, you do, but my guess would be that this was when Maverick started to wane. Maybe that was a time when Agrolome got a bit more popular.
So Maverick Loam, jeez. Agrolome's Genesis is actually from around the same time. At least the source thread about the deck was
started like
in early 2010.
Is this like the Terravore deck?
Yeah. So it's just a there's this guy says that it's a spiritual successor of the old wildfire list of the Urza's Tempest standard format. To describe that in a way that anybody who isn't like a savant of Magic history would understand, is just mana and bombs. You're just making lands and having some acceleration, and then you just cast spells that just completely devastate everything. One of the most iconic is the card Devastating Dreams, which I dearly wish was at all playable in today's Legacy meta, but things like Spell Snare, I have not. I own some. I've never I sleeved one up in a sideboard just for fun, but I never ended up casting it. But it's just like getting that card countered is the worst, the utter worst. Like, because think about it, like, because it's an additional cost to cast. You have to discard X cards at random, so it actually makes Force of Will, plus card advantage for the caster.
Yeah, it's pretty live.
Literally almost never happens for them. So I think the metagame is just too full of things like Force of Will, and also Tarmogoyf's printing apparently, this is according to this thread, did some serious damage to Devastating Dreams utility as a finisher, because what if you discard an artifact and an enchantment at random, and then all of a sudden the Tarmogoyf is too big to die to the Devastating Dreams? Because it used to be like, you'd Devastating Dreams and then cast a Terravore, and then your Terravore is like an 8/8 trampler or something like that, and you just proceed to win the game because they also had all their lands destroyed.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't quite work anymore due to several. I mean, I guess there was a lot of printing. So in Terravore's case, there was a lot of printings that just kind of increased the amount of graveyard hate that was just easily available out of the sideboard, or just even main deck. Terravore was dead even before Deathrite Shaman came out, but definitely doesn't help the card's playability. Even though, again, Terravore, awesome creature, so cool, just hilarious.
You should just throw a one of in Loam 1 week.
Well, so this is like a ridiculous tangent, but the coolest thing I've ever heard anybody ever do with the Terravore involves, this was a story that somebody told me about a random SCG tournament in Houston a few years ago. He said that he played round one. He was just oh my god, the worst round one possible. He had a deck based around Orcish Lumberjack, which for those who don't know, is an Ice Age common. It reads, for 1 red mana, you get a 1/1 orc creature. And his ability is tap, sacrifice the forest, add 3 mana and any combination of red and or green to your mana pool. So the line,
Okay, that's pretty spicy.
yeah, the line that this player told me about that he faced in game 1 of round 1, and he was playing Maverick at this tournament too, mind you, which is actually extra relevant. The line was, he goes, Taiga, Orcish Lumberjack, pass. Turn 2, Taiga, crack Orcish Lumberjack, cast Bloodbraid Elf, because he had now and then he Bloodbraid Elfed into a Terravore, and won the game very presently by, just attacking. the Maverick player had and he must not have had Swords of Plowshares, because I feel like Swords of Plowshares would have really thrown a wrench in that plan. But your Deathrite Shamans and Mother of Runes don't do anything if you're facing down a 5/5 Trampler on turn 2 plus a 3/2 haste creature.
Yeah, that's sick. Someone should do that now.
I know, if I had more
time.
It's
like the green-red dark ritual. How are we not jamming this? That's it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just takes a turn to get online, I guess. But
Orcish Lumberjack's art, the art is great too. It's like this orc in like a walking robot with a buzzsaw. Yeah, it's really, really classic Ice Age. All right, so I guess getting back on track a bit. So there was sort of a kind of dark period for playing Maverick for a few years there, which isn't to say that you couldn't play the deck at all. Like, there are plenty of good players who were just jamming it anyway. And like I said, it's tough if you have a bad matchup against the best deck in the format, but you can still do well. I mean, during this whole period of Miracle's dominance, there was Delver was still a really popular deck. And
yeah, Maverick is pretty damn good against the
Delver.
But earlier this year, we had the banning of Sensei's Divining Top, and with that, Miracles effectively died. It's come back in a different form, but it's not really relevant for tonight's discussion. And I think with that, you started to see a resurgence of Maverick. Do you guys care to comment on what you think might have been happening there? Why is Maverick suddenly making a comeback?
I think it's making a strong comeback right now because there's so many different variants, so it fits a lot of different type of fair play styles, and it's also a decent deck in Legacy that isn't going to cost an arm and a leg to get it to play, because you have reprints of like Wasteland, and then now Night of the Reliquary with like Iconic Masters, and everything's outside of like the dual land. You'll find everything for around $20 and less. You know what I mean? So you can get like,
and you only need 4 dual lands. Like, you need 2 Savannahs, a Bayou. I mean, well, depending on the version you're running, 2 Savannahs, a Bayou, and a Scrubland. That's like what, $300 or something? Like,
I mean, I would guess the whole deck is probably worth $1,000 or less. Which
it's a little more than that, but at least according to it's close though. Yeah,
but I mean, in a world where some of the decks in Legacy are 2 to 3
$4,000.
It's relatively reasonable by those standards. So yeah, I definitely agree with that, Johnny. And to be frank, that was a consideration of mine when I was putting the deck together. I thought I could either buy back into blue, or I could build something with play to it that is a third of the cost.
Yeah, because you hear these like stories of Maverick, and you hear these like, you have your Legacy is almost defined by 2 different types of decks. You have the Brainstorm and Force of Will decks, and you also have the non-Brainstorm decks. So you can sleeve up Brainstorm and Force of Will in a blue shell in Legacy, and it really depends on what your matchup is with the other 2 or the other 52 cards in that deck. You know what I mean? Because that's nothing special. You have Brainstorm, Force of Will, Ponders, all this kind of stuff nowadays, and then that determines like the blue meta, and then you go into like the non-blue meta of Legacy, and then you think of other decks between like Pox, Maverick, 4-color Loam, Merfolk, different things.
Various Chalice decks,
yeah, various Chalice decks. But then you hear like cool stories of like having Mother of Runes, and a deck that can sleeve up Mother of Runes and fight against like Stoneforge Mystic, True Name Nemesis, and like Gristlebrand and still win. That's kind of a cool deck to go to like root for, and kind of like gives you like a different thought process on Legacy from that point of view. If you don't know too much about Legacy and you want to dabble into the format, you're like, oh well, I can just play a different Maverick deck, or if I wanted to sleeve up the green-white version to Punishing, to straight up like a green black white attrition kind of base with Night of the Reliquary,
Yeah. Well, it's really
It's even
kind
like a
of
white Jund.
it's really kind of a I would almost I hesitate to say this, but almost like a dying archetype, because I would say that Maverick and Death and Taxes, which are kind of distant cousins,
Yeah.
are sort of the only decks left that really. Maybe you could lump Nick Fit in with that as well. But main reason I'm thinking that is because it's not a Brainstorm deck. It's not a Chalice deck. It's not a Blood Moon deck. Um, so it's basically what's left out of those, because those are like, in my opinion, sort of like the three like kind of biggest like ways to divide up how the legacy metagame looks like right now. Because it's like if you're not a Brainstorm deck, why aren't you a Chalice deck? Or why aren't you playing Blood Moon Stompy or something? And the answer is, well, there's still these like kind of attrition-y prison-ish style decks that are actually still very good, largely due to recent printings, like the toolbox aspect of Maverick, and just some of the really powerful hate bears and kind of monolithicness of Death and Taxes give them extra edge, whereas you can't devise other decks really like this that work. Like, people have tried to make. Well, no, I mean, it's a Brainstorm deck. Bant Stoneblade. Like, it looks sort of like Maverick, looks sort of like, Esper or Stoneblade or something. But it's just, I mean, you'll see it occasionally top 8 because somebody's like, yeah, I want to have some like crazy fun, but it's just not very popular.
And another thing that kind of leads people, or I guess players, to playing Maverick, or keeping it short and simple, is that it's very good for being consistent, and that's one thing that holds its glue together. So you think of consistent and decks like in blue and Legacy, so their glue is like Ponder, I guess now Portent for the Miracles deck, Brainstorm, different kind of cantrips like that, as opposed to you find consistent cards in Maverick. You think of like Noble Hierarch to Stoneforge Mystic, Green Sun Zenith. And then kind of the same thing for like Death and Taxes. Its consistency is almost just
it's redundant
and Aether Vial.
Yeah. The kind of the grease in the wheels, sort of. Green Sun Zenith, I've heard described as the closest thing that a non-blue deck can get to running something like Brainstorm, because it adds consistency, because it basically lets you. In fact, it's actually more accurate than Brainstorm, because when you successfully cast it, you get to get whatever you want, or at least whatever you were planning on getting. Whereas Brainstorm's sort of more like, well, how good is this? Are these 3 cards like? And you there.
I mean, Knight is another form of tutoring in the deck as well.
Right.
So, for being a green-white X deck, you have a library manipulation. I guess you also have Sylvan Library in there too.
Yeah. That kind of brings us into like kind of the next topic, I guess, which is just Knight of the Reliquary. That was sort of like the impetus of us doing this particular episode. Since, I mean, I'll just say it. I think it's one of my favorite Magic cards, and it's definitely my favorite creature in the entire game. Because it's just like, it's a jack of all trades, like, but it's a master of all of them too. Like, it's like a Swiss Army knife of a creature. Like, it can do literally anything. Like, it can lock your opponent out. It can it can just be like it can fix your mana. Like, you can use it as a land drop if you untap with it and you don't have a land, still you get to pretend like you had a land drop, because you can just tap a land, knight it, and then get another land and tap it, and you keep your mana curve going.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, also it goes
like a combo piece for like Dark Depths, or Sejiri Step. It can punch through a creature.
Yeah,
it's just
get the little silver bullet that you need out of the land base.
And it simultaneously can play just the ultimate offense.
Yeah, I mean, how many creatures in the format are bigger? Like, almost like very few. The list is small.
It's only that are being cast on fairly, really.
Yeah. There's no other creature that is as big as Knight that isn't cheated into play. That I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, it forces your opponents to use their true names defensively, and if you're on the defense, you can do some crazy things with that, and Maze and stuff like Scrib Ranger also just pairs perfectly with it. So,
well, I love playing against someone who isn't super familiar with the card, because, I mean, honestly, even if you play quite a bit of Legacy, you might not see it too often, because it's played in decks that just aren't that popular. But they'll try to, like, they'll just ruin their combat math, because
Yeah.
you can do things like they know how the ability works, but they don't realize that you can tutor up a fetch land, crack the fetch land, and then you just got +2, or that wasteland does the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, I've definitely won combat trades just because my opponent didn't think about that. Like, they didn't know. Like, it's just a phenomenal creature. Its only weakness is that it can't protect itself really. It's very difficult to do so, especially if you have not untapped with it. If you untap with it though, good luck to your opponent winning that game. You have something really pretty crazy going on.
Yeah, well, and the fortunate thing on the note of being able to protect itself is that it's typically a 4 in a deck with also 4 green suns. So, it's a deck that you're kind of or it's a card you're building around. It's something you always want to have. But if your opponent manages to plow the first one, it's not like lights out.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're going to draw more creatures. You're probably going to draw against some. But it's like out of a Delver deck that's running 10 to 12 creatures, if you can manage to resolve a removal spell on their one creature their hand had, you might have just sealed the game because they might not have enough time to find their next threat. And that's why the deck was so good against Rug Delver, because Rug Delver, before the advent of Deathrite Shaman, was the best Delver deck. But Maverick beat Rug Delver, but Rug Delver kind of beat like almost everything else. So you played Maverick to prey on Rug Delver, which was the biggest share of the metagame. This was like kind of right before Miracles became a thing. And yeah, those were like the 2 monsters of the metagame. It was like the golden age of Maverick. As far as I understand, this was like right at the tail end of when I picked up Magic again and got into Legacy. But I've read about it and I've heard people talk about it.
So Mike, something you kind of suggested is that, either Maverick or either Knight is a card that pushes you in a specific direction, or it's a card that only goes into a certain type of deck. But what's interesting is that there is a lot of diversity in the different types of Knight decks you can build. We mentioned, for instance, that Bant deck, but even if we look at the Maverick archetype itself, it's coming from the classic green-white direction. There's also Junk Maverick, and you can even go heavier on black and have like Dark Maverick with Bob in it.
Yep.
And recently, what the internet has been crazy about is the Punishing Maverick list too.
Yeah.
And Johnny, I know you had started to touch on this earlier. So.
Yeah, the Punishing Maverick deck is a lot of fun, and just having more utility in a certain deck that you already have a lot of utility in adds that extra step for certain players, like I was saying earlier, because you can have a sweet grindy game between like Punishing Fire and Life from the Loam, like in this Punishing Maverick shell, or you can like stick with like the green-white version and have like Tireless Tracker and Random Up Excavator, like these new cool printings of different cards like Big Thalia, and you can even jam that in the Punishing Fire version. The one that kind of throws me personally off from playing the Punishing Fire version, which I have all the cards for it on the side just in case I ever wanted to sleeve it up, is the fact that you don't get to play Deathrite. And right now with all the the consistent, like, I guess here in town locally, there's a lot of Black-Red Reanimator, and there's a lot of different like variants of like combos. So I feel like Deathrite Shaman's kind of more necessary here at least. But if I were to take it and have some fun, like if I'm going to GP Oklahoma here in 2 weeks, I'm going to probably take the most, the Maverick, Punishing Maverick pieces and have that sleeved up for the attrition games. But one thing that kind of also like keeps me on the edge between like Reanimator and the 4-color control deck,
you mean like check pile?
Yeah, the check pile deck. It's not that good. Punishing Fire isn't that good against the deck because it'll kill like a Baleful Strix and it'll kill a Deathrite, but it doesn't do anything against their True Name Nemesis, their Leovolds. It just draws cards and stuff like that. So my personal take on Maverick is always going to be more of a green-white heavier version because I play 2 Noble Hierarchs and 3 Deathrites right now, and some people will just play 4 Deathrites, no birds, no Noble Hierarchs, anything like that. But I'm trying to keep it more like try to keep it as fair as possible. But just Deathrite is just such a good card right now. Between and in closing out games with check pile because they can't ever really close the game, to having game against Storm by eating their Past in Flames or whatever the case is.
Lands is a big one for me.
Lands.
We have a few local Lands players, and I would not be happy about showing up weekly and knowing that I'm going to get paired against Lands without Deathrite in the deck.
Yeah, for sure. It just kind of feels bad having to have Punishing Fire over Thalia in most matchups too, because our local meta here is very strong on blue. We have lands. We have just a strong plethora of the legacy field here in town. We don't really depend on like there's not like four death red or not four there's not like four death and taxes players. Two, we're pretty much the only two Maverick players in town. And then you'll have like show and tell, you'll have Reanimator, you'll have a bunch of Storm, you'll have Burn from time to time, you'll have Nick Fit. We have a large plethora of
definitely
metas
have a very healthy metagame in our local scene. I've definitely extremely true. You can show up at there's guys who have super deep pockets and they could build like 5 decks, 10 different decks. So they'll just they don't care. They'll bring whatever next week. So you can't like metagame them. So I think you're right, at least in our local meta, to kind of stick to something that's more consistent and powerful as opposed to trying to, rock, paper, scissors your way through the meta.
Yeah, because you think of it more like how good is Punishing Fire over Thalia in this case. So you want to stick to, how good it is in your meta and how you personally like to play. So if you want to have a lot of, grind, you want to play a lot of Punishing Fire. If you want to play a more anti-blue package, and you can play like Gaddock, Teague, and Thalia in your main deck, as opposed to like, two, like a Scrib Ranger and possibly like a Scavenging Goose in your main deck for the Punishing Fire version over the Thalias, just different builds. Like there's 101 ways to build Maverick, and you can even do more like white, black, splash green, and all that kinds of different things. But it's more depending on like how good is Punishing Fire and how good is the red blast in your sideboard. Good, as opposed to having like a second Gaddock Teague and having like Thoughtseize and Abrupt Decays in your sideboard. To the red splash, which is also why I like the sorry to just carry on, but which is another reason why I really like the 4-color aggro loam, because you get Thoughtseize in your sideboard, and if Chalice isn't good, you get to play more of like an Affair deck, and then you get to bounce between like a strong variety of sideboard cards, because you can get Red Blast, you can get Ancient Grudge, you can get Thoughtseize, Abrupt Decay, you can get Disenchant, like all these cool Planeswalkers. Like you can play Lily and Knight in the same deck, which is not something you normally see. So you get a bunch of strong sideboard options as opposed to a strong play in the 4-color aggro loam deck.
I mean, it really is just mana and bombs. Like I'm just flipping through my deck. I'm just kind of absently doing it this whole cast. I mean, the deck has I think it's like maybe 30 mana sources.
Something like
Diamond is just such a strong card.
Mox Diamond. It's definitely the deck doesn't exist without Mox Diamond. Because the ability to like, jam a Jerwin Chalice and say, can you deal with this? Because if not, you lose the game. Versus like Grixis or something like that. Is really powerful. But also like against decks that maybe that's not so good. Maybe you get a turn 1 Dark Confidant, like that's like such a fun start, because you just all of a sudden maybe even had to mull to 5 to get there, but all of a sudden you just like not very many non-blue decks basically get to unmulligan quite like that. But yeah, no, I really love this deck. It's a monster of a deck. Like like Johnny just said, like Knight and Lily in the same deck. Like oh my god, like you have both of those things on the battlefield. Again, like we talked about earlier, how if you untap with the Knight, your opponent better, be on a strategy that's actually, which is unlikely that it's not good, or have something really serious going on. But if you have Knight and Lily, like, good luck casting your removal and like, being able to develop a board presence after that.
So a cool thing about all this is if you're a player who's, maybe considering getting into Legacy, or if you're thinking about building a new deck, a good thing about buying into this whole range is that you might, let's say you start off by building just standard like Junk Maverick. You've got a good deck available to yourself, but if you're willing to invest a little bit of more money, you suddenly have this whole range of decks available to you, and you can mess around with different play styles or find the thing that's right for the meta. So it's just like, if you buy into certain other decks in Legacy, I take D&T as an example. Very
few cards transfer over into something else.
Exactly. So if you're the type of person who's interested in maybe like marrying a deck, something in the Knight of the Reliquary range isn't the worst way to go, because you can be on one general deck but still have flexibility and not get burnt out of that.
Yeah.
Cool. One other point I'd like to go over is maybe talking about where Maverick stands against some of the top decks at the moment. I've got the sources decks to beat pulled up here, which this month is a little bit slim. There are only 4 decks to beat based off the current data. The number one obvious one is Grixis Delver. How do you guys feel about the Grixis Delver deck for either Maverick or Agrolome?
I personally feel like as a more traditional green-white Maverick-y kind of deck, I feel like it's very fun and it's a very good matchup for the Maverick side, mainly because they're big hitters depending on the build of the Grixis Delver deck. They can have Young Pyromancer, or they could have True Name Nemesis, and sometimes they'll mix both in. And then if they play a 1, then they won't play another card that you don't really have to worry about between like Cabal Therapy and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it's very strong because Green Sun Zenith is a very good card, and even if you get it dazed, depending on what you get, next turn you can just kind of draw what you wanted anyways, because that's just how Green Sun Zenith is. It's just, an option for you at the time. And it kind of punches through all your cards. Your creatures are just better in utility than the Delver deck is, because their only utility creature is Deathrite Shaman, and they're relying on flipping their Delva, wastelanding you, and then like Young Pyromancer or True Name Nemesis against you. But you have Stoneforge Mystic, and then that's card's pretty much Demonic Tutor, depending on what you want and your depending on what you need at the time. So if you're playing against like Young Pyromancer, you can get your Jitte. If you're playing against True Name, you can get your
Sophie,
and whatever the case is. Also, Scavenging Ooze is actually very good against the Delver decks, because you can kind of just make it bigger than a 4/4, and then they can't really kill it.
Yep. Yeah, it also keeps them off Angler.
Yeah, you can put pressure on that.
Yeah, I basically agree with you. I think that the current Grixis Delver deck is so streamlined and strong that I'll still lose games to it, because if they do their Delver thing, like I mentioned earlier, if they just daze you and waste you and stifle you and you don't ever get to play Magic, then there's not much you can do about it. But
yeah,
if they're not going insane, I think that our plan is just very strong against them.
Well, you can almost do the same thing. Like especially if you're on like a version with Thalia, like green, white, black, or just straight green, white. Like, you go turn 1 Deathrite, turn 2 Thalia, Wasteland. All of a sudden, and assuming all those spells are solved, because of course you are playing against a blue deck, all of a sudden they're going to have an extremely difficult time getting anything going. Especially if you can follow up with more Wastelands, because they don't play any basic lands like ever.
Right.
Another positive is that a lot of the Maverick decks are playing at least a 1-of mana dork that is not Deathrite, so you're not automatically going to get stuck in these Deathrite showdowns. So maybe they're trying to, maybe you're locked with your Deathrite versus theirs, but then you play your Hierarch and suddenly you've got mana.
Yep. And it helps punch through a little bit better too against certain cards.
Yep. Agreed. So yeah, I would say it's positive for the deck, which is a good thing. It's Grixis Delver is probably the single best deck, so having a good matchup there is great.
Yeah, I definitely would just kind of fall in with my opinion about the matchup for Agrolome, because I mean, you're basically doing almost the same thing. You're ramping with Mox Diamond in this case, but you also have Chalice, which is a complete and utter beating against them, especially game 1. Unless they're on a green splash build, they
might just have no
unlikely. They might even just have to scoop if they can't counter it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's another cool thing is that you also get a repeatable removal spell. You get Punishing Fire over Swords to Plowshares.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, just loaming and wastelanding and recurring wastelands. Like, if you can get that online, like, but the problem with Agrolome always is that has a lot of powerful things in it, and if you can execute any one of them in a consistent manner in the game that you're in, you probably win. But it's got a lot of different packages kind of smashed together. So if you suffer the problem that all blue decks or non-blue decks suffer, in that if you don't draw the right cards, you can't continue your plan. You have to switch plans, or you just have to sit there because you didn't get the next step.
Agrolome also has a little bit grosser of a mana base than Maverick because it's a 4-color deck. Have you found that to be a problem against Delver at all?
I mean, you can definitely. I mean, any deck can lose to Wasteland though, and any deck can lose to Stifle plus Wasteland, or Daze plus Wasteland or whatever, because that's sort of like the Magical Christmas Land for the Delver deck.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I think like you look at this deck's mana base on paper and you're like, oh my god, what is this? That looks horrifying. But in practice, especially once you get used to the deck and you start learning which lands you need to fetch at which times based on the cards in your hand and kind of what you need in the situation, it's actually pretty good. Like the real problem is flooding out because, like I said, there's 30 mana sources in the deck,
yeah.
Well, like probably 28, and then 2 cards that aren't mana sources there, but they're lands. So you can definitely suffer problems like that, consistency problems like that the brainstorm decks don't necessarily have to deal with because they get to shuffle a lot and sculpt their hand, which you never get to do in a non-blue deck. You don't get to sculpt your hand.
Yeah.
Really.
So the next deck to beat that I wanted to talk about is very similar. It's Check Pile, which I will start off by saying I've only played against Check Pile like 2 or 3 times ever because very few people locally play it. I think Brian Hockey like built it 1 week, but I think he hops decks a lot.
Yeah.
But I have gotten stomped by Check Pile the 2 times I played it.
Really?
Yes, really. In both games, in both matches, it was just like Snapcaster, Kolaghan's Command, Abrupt Decay, Strix was just like I could never get her ahead of it. But on the flip side, I feel like that doesn't have to be the case. I know people on the internet seem to say that it's a fine matchup for Maverick, and I wonder if it's maybe I just need to adjust my board or adjust my play style against it.
I think you
Random Up Excavator, man. It's like I was telling you.
What's that?
Random Up Excavator, man. That's what
I know. And that's a card that we haven't discussed at all tonight, which maybe
I haven't personally tested. I haven't casted it. But
it's so much fun.
Yeah, it's definitely awesome, and I really do want to play it because I was on vacation in Spain earlier this year, and I picked up a Spanish one.
Nice.
Like,
do you know what is the name in Spanish?
Excavadora Ramanap.
That's rad. Well, my personal experiences with the 4-color Check Pile, I feel like it's more fun than it is like challenging. So you have to play around if they're playing the 1 of Bolt or if they're playing, just a random Unearth. I've played against like a 1 of Unearth or 2 of Unearth, and then like a 1 of Lightning Bolts to Kolaghan's Command to Lilies. Like it's a very weird deck.
Did you get to play against Cass yet?
Oh yes, that deck, that version looks like it's a lot of fun.
The card's so nuts.
Yeah, because you get to for free, quote unquote, flashback like a Brainstorm or Abrupt Decay, or he was also playing a Charter Course version with Young Pyromancer.
Wow.
So that was actually really cool. But like I was saying, I feel like it's a very fun matchup as opposed to that. And the 2 cards that aren't traditionally found, I guess in some cases in certain Maverick decks that help me with the matchup is Tireless Tracker and Random Up Excavator. Because you have these 2 cards that are almost like your own your own free draw card a turn, 2 cards a turn on the stick with, and they have like it's just more utility creatures. So
yeah,
you can
let you grind with them basically.
Yeah, they're very good grind cards.
Yeah.
You can grind out between like blowing up their lands to drawing more cards, like having more cards against them if they have like a Lily in play. And another good thing I find that it's really good against them is just having Qasali Pridemage out, because they play both Sylvan Library, and then the Baleful Strix is fine, but you can usually swing, and then with the Exalted Trigger on the stack, blow up the Baleful Strix, and then they have to either have a removal spell, but if you don't have like one of our 4 or 5 protection creatures between Mother of Runes and Sylvan Safekeeper, it's going to be kind of rough for them. So it's more just kind of like playing like you would against the Miracles deck, but they just don't have Terminus. They have more spot removal between like Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, Kolaghan's Command.
Sure. Yeah, you can definitely overwhelm the removal suite. It just kind of comes down to constructing a board presence that they can't deal with or have a hard time dealing with. And again, that's another deck that has truly has a horrible mana base, like a very vulnerable mana base. Yeah. So like Johnny was saying with Ramen Up Excavator, like you can wasteland them every turn and they will never do another thing in the entire game. Like
yeah, I think there's also some good sideboard options that you could do against them. I like Choke, seems like it'd be really good. I've also led to believe that planeswalkers are really good. So if you're running like Garruk in your board, or maybe
like Elspeth
Gideon or Elspeth, yeah,
Gideon.
Also, new Liliana would be really strong. I don't know how feasibly Maverick can make double black, but
I wouldn't personally do that. You kind of want to stick with green or white for Maverick with your planeswalkers. That's one of the things about Aggro that I like, though, is that because of Mox Diamond and your kind of weird land base, you can play double black planeswalkers. The hardest one is actually double white. You can definitely play double green, although I don't know how many of those are actually good. Or you can even play red
would be the only one.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really considered any of the double green planeswalkers. Garruk Relentless is pretty much about what you want and is very easy to cast. But I know, I own the Chandra Torch of Defiance and Chandra Pyromaster. I haven't actually thrown them in, but I definitely could. They're not uncastable. They're great to bring in against a Blood Moon deck, because all of a sudden your opponent casts a Blood Moon and they think they're good, and then all of a sudden you just drop the 6-mana Chandra and just win the game. But that's very marginal and not something to really plan for. But if it happens, you got a great story to tell your Magic friends.
I mean, Torch of Defiance is just such a strong card too. I definitely like her. All right, so next one on the list is Eldrazi Stompy, which is funny to me that it's on the list because I haven't played against that deck in forever, but I guess it's doing well. Any thoughts on that matchup?
Mike, how do you feel about that matchup? I guess
so. Again, that's a deck that plays 25 lands, but it's an aggro deck. So I've always had issue. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily bad because obviously it does well, but that's a really good access to attack it on. In that, if you can either kill their creatures or destroy their lands, they're going to have a hard time functioning. I found that at least from the aggro perspective, because I haven't ever played against it as Maverick, but I feel like it's kind of going to be the same. If I get to execute any one of my 5 different kind of packages in my deck quickly enough, they really are not going to have a good time against it. The only one that's not so great is Punishing Fire, but it still can do work. But getting a Lone Wasteland lock on them, they can't do anything because their creatures actually cost 5 mana. If you can keep them on 2 lands, they're gonna have a tough time making those Reality Smashers. If you make a Knight of the Reliquary against them, they better have a handful of free Reality Smashers, or they're gonna lose because you're just gonna win in combat every time with that.
Yeah, that's basically my feeling. Is a lot of it comes down to just, do you make your Knight, and to what extent do they have a nut draw? I mean, if Eldrazi, it's just like I was saying with Delver. If Eldrazi goes turn 1 Chalice, turn 2 Thought Knot, turn 3 Smasher, you're probably going to lose, but that's true for almost any deck in Legacy.
Yeah.
Well, not for Aggro, because I'm a Chalice deck too, and that I laugh at their Chalice on 1. Nice doing 2 damage to yourself. Thank you. Okay. Mox Diamond, Abrupt Decay the Mimic, and then make a Knight the next turn, and then all of a sudden they have to face down a 6/6 that can tutor up Maze of Ith, and then just if they don't present any more pressure, you start wastelanding them, and they're dead.
So that's one thing I found you can usually have on a strong axis on the Maverick or Knight of the Reliquary side of the table is, can you have your Knight bigger than a 6/6? Because that's usually a good point for them. They can't really hit harder than that because they don't play Ulamogs or anything ridiculous like that. They want to keep it kind of low to the ground for them. So you want to have if you can have a Knight more than a 6/6 that can easily block, Thought Knots here, Mimics, Reality Smashers, whatever the case is. And also another good question is, can you tutor out another Knight, or do you have equipment? So
equipment I think is a really big one here.
So Umezawa's Jitte is insane in that matchup because it throws up their combat math. You can gain life, you can shrink their dudes. It's just insane against them. So on the Maverick side of the table, since I play more, I guess, little dudes, and then my hotspot is more 3 than it is 2. I have 4 Knights, a Tireless Tracker, Roundabout Excavator, and I've even thought about throwing in a Corsair, but that's for another story. So I play the Gaia's Cradle, so you can have
Yep.
having access to your knight and being able to tutor up against their wastelands. So they can like wasteland you out of the game ideally, and you can even like tutor up like a Greenson or a Gaia's Cradle to have infinite amounts of mana to kind of just play more around them, because their main lockout thing, like you said earlier, Mike, was if they have Eternal Chalice and Thought-Knot Seer to wastelands and equipment to Reality Smashers. There's just more. Can you land more, because they don't have any real big kill spells besides like Dismember or something.
Dismember,
like that.
yeah, you have to get above 5/5 to really be safe.
So you really, like I was saying earlier, you want to try to get around 5/5s or try to get bigger than a 5/5, and then like your Mother of Runes and your Death Race, they don't do anything in that matchup. So you want to have like the real big hitters between Nether Reliquary, Stoneforge.
Yeah.
I guess in some cases Qasali Pride Mage, but I feel like I was saying earlier, it's just a lot more fun than it is hard. I guess that's the best thing that you can have with this deck in Legacy right now, is that it's so off the chart right now. I think it is gaining in some popularity, but it's so off the chart right now that you can have this cool game against Eldrazi to check pile to Miracles, and they might not even know what you're on and what you could be packing in your deck between like Green Sun Zenith, so you can play like Sigardas and then like other weird kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the matchup overall is really good if you can land a knight and some type of like creature and equipment, any type of thing besides like Mother of Runes and stuff like that. But I still think it's an okay matchup, like you said, just kind of getting like a knight wasteland kind of lock, and then like in your case you have Life from the Loam, and I guess in my case I have like a Random Map Excavator, so it's kind of like a Life from the Loam-ish kind of card.
And Swords of Plowshares is a phenomenal card against them.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's one of the reasons that I especially like Agrolome in the matchup, is because game 2, Chalice has come out. I've got swords in the board. I bring in, let's see what we got here. I bring in, swords. I bring in Toxic Deluge, just kind of removal, or like, and probably like, maybe my Garruk, or whatever Planeswalker might be playing. And the matchup just gets better because it's just so great being on a Chalice deck and facing another Chalice deck, because it's like the post board games are just so much better, because it's like I don't need this 4 slot. The sideboarding is so easy. I get to bring in all this cool stuff.
Yeah. And like I'm kind of the same way. Like you just bring out your Mother of Runes, and in some cases like some death rates, because they're just bad in that matchup, and you get to bring in cool stuff. Like I play Zealous Persecutions.
Oh yeah.
That card is like super fun against them, because it can be a blowout. It can be it's more of a blowout card than it is anything else. But being able to like kill a Mimic in response to certain things, like and then like throwing off their combat math, and then it's just a lot of fun.
For sure.
Not to get us off topic, but something that came up, Johnny, is you mentioned the 3-drop slot as something that is where you pack a lot of the power in your deck. There's a difficulty I've run into with Maverick, is that I think the 3-drop slot is pretty competitive. In my opinion, it's probably just wrong to play less than 4 knights. So you have to kind of, to an extent, choose wisely on how many other 3-drops you're playing. Yeah. Personally, I'm on, for creatures, the only other 3-drops are 3 Big Thalia, because I'm a huge fan of the Big Thalia. Yeah, but there's all these other options. You mentioned Courser, Tracker, Ramanop, and then there's other things you could mess around with, like Sanctum, Prelate.
Oh yeah, I've seen lists with like Reclamation Sage, I think is the name.
I love that card. That's a Agrolome staple. Probably the best performing card in my Agrolome sideboard.
I mean, I definitely play it in the board, but yeah. And then you've got, like Renegade Rallier would be another one people are messing around with.
Fun stuff. I don't have my box in here with me right now, but I have a toolbox of just like random cool cards that I could throw in at like any moment, just to have more fun with like a green-white version of Maverick.
That's a slippery slope, man. I have this box that's literally like got full of like 500 cards. But I mean, that's one of the cool to those listeners who are maybe considering looking at these archetypes. Like, that's one of the cool things is like you can change your list every week for the entire year and run a different list every week, and
Yep.
you will still have cards that you want to play, but I mean, that maybe is a bit of hyperbole, but the spirit of what I'm saying is definitely true. Like, there's so many good options, and you can just like, because I mean, you have like a slot in your sideboard for just like something big and bomby, and like that just opens up the like entire plethora of awesome Magic cards. Like, just one of my favorites is which I actually have never personally used, but I've always like fantasized about it, is that mono green commander from one of the commander sets, Titania, Priestess of Argoth.
Oh yeah.
If you resolve that, you're probably going to win the game, because you're going to put like 20 power on the board, like right.
Oh yeah.
Back a fetch, and them activate Knight. Yeah, you just made like 25 power.
Yeah. I've been meaning to try out Armageddon in my deck, and I just haven't done it yet. But that's
not Scribranger. Sylvan Safekeeper, man. I took out one Mother of Runes for it, so it's a green Zenzian target for like a protection kind of heavy.
If you're on Ramanop, yeah, it makes perfect sense with Ramanop.
Yep. Yeah, and that's my version that I'm playing right now. It's a lot of fun, and like kind of like what Mike was saying earlier, you get just a cool toolbox of toolboxy kind of cards. So like Aven Mind Sensor, Coursers, Voice of Resurgence, Scavenging Ooze, like the list just goes on, and it's even better depending on like if you want to splash blue, if you want to splash red, if you just want to keep it green black, or green like more black heavy than it is anything, and you can just have a lot of fun with it. Like.
The last deck that I wanted to talk about from the deck to beat, and this one seems like a bit of a no-brainer, is Death and Taxes. I will just put it out there that I think it's a really good matchup for Maverick. I think we're just doing what they're doing, but we're bigger.
Yeah, for sure.
You could definitely still lose to their kind of nut draws, just like you can to any deck. If they open with a kind of, if you don't have removal and they open like Ether Vial into port, like Ether Vial into port is really tough to beat by anybody.
Or if they go like Mom and you don't have a plow.
From my perspective as an Agrelin player, I need to have Punishing Fire available as soon as possible, because that just beats their almost full deck. And then because I need to be able to kill the Mom right away, or things get out of control quickly. But they actually, like, my Chalice is not very good against them, because if they get an Ether Vial down, they don't care. And then they also have things like Flicker Wisp, which can just turn it off. And but at the same time, you just make a couple Knights, and they just live long enough to just kill them.
On the note of Chalice, I'll say that when I play Mud, I just end up boarding my Chalices out game 2 and 3 against them, because you don't really
fine game 1 if you get it, like as everyone, if you get it turn 1, because then they kind of need to deal with it, especially if you're on the play, because you can lock them out of Ether Vial.
Or it might shut off their plows, but
games 2 and 3, they're probably gonna know about it, and it's just you're better off using the slots for more removal.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Okay, I was gonna say, I feel like it's also good on kind of like what Stuart was saying earlier, is that on the Maverick side, it's very good because the Death and Taxes deck is also a toolbox kind of deck, because they have Sanctum Prelate, they have Mother of Runes, they have Thalia, they also have Phyrexian Revoker, and then they also have a new tutor card from Conspiracy.
Yeah, Recruiter,
and then they also have like Palace Jailer. So the Recruiter's their big like tutor card, and they also can play like Aven Mind Sensor, Sarah's Ascendant, I think, or Sarah's Angel.
Sarah, what is that card? Sarah Avenger. Yeah, and then,
man, such an awesome card. I actually, in my history of this archetype, I didn't mention earlier that I used to play Death and Taxes, but oh man, I won't get into it too much. But when I did, Sarah's Avenger was like the most fun thing to kill people with. Just, like, so deadly with a sword on it. Holy shit.
Yeah. But like as I was saying earlier, you can just have like they're kind of more of like a white weenie, toolboxy kind of fair deck, but we also have green, so we're just doing a little bit bigger. So we have like Qasali Pride Mages, we have Knights, we have Thalias as well, but they're not really good in that matchup. Scavenging Ooze, and then like in my case, Chalice Tracker, we have Mana Dorks, Death Rites, and
And
stuff.
Zealous Persecution out of the board is just such a house in that.
Yep.
Yeah, and pretty much whoever wins that matchup is who can get Stoneforge and Umezawa's Jitte first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
guess to their credit, like you said, they do have Revoker, which is pretty helpful. But still, I felt like solidly in command anytime I've played that matchup. I just
Yeah,
feel like I have the inevitability. So
for sure.
so I think that kind of covers all the topics I had wanted to go over. But do you guys have anything else about Knight or Maverick or Agrolome that you want to talk about?
I mean, it would probably be yeah, not really. I don't know. I guess if anybody out there is not super clear on what Agrolome is, in order to describe it succinctly, I would say it's sort of like if Jund, Lands, and Maverick had like somehow had a baby. That's what Agrolome is. Because it's like, it has Punishing Fire and Loam from Lands. It has Punishing Fire and Lily from Jund, but it has you know, a Toolboxy Green Sun Zenith Wasteland Night package from Maverick. So it's like
I mean, you
it's
also
kind of
get
in a
the
middle space,
2020 from
but
Lands as well.
yeah. Although you don't lately lists aren't running that. Although I don't think there's really compelling arguments either way. It's just kind of what the trend is. Being able to do Merit Lage is both fun and sometimes it's just like, man, I wouldn't have won this game if it wasn't for that. Like,
Johnny, do you ever
But-
play the combo in your deck?
I do play it from time to time. I feel like personally, if I was to play it, I would put in a Scrub Ranger
yes,
just
Oh,
to
you're
have a
not
more
playing-
consistent version of
You're not
being
playing
able to
Scrap
untap.
Ranger right now.
No, because it's kind of in that weird category between do I play the fifth mana dork, because it can be like a mana dork in
Yeah.
itself. Do I play the fifth mana dork and play more consistent land base in my opinion, or do I play the Scrub Ranger and the combo taking out the mana dork and possibly like the random up excavator? It's really weird because
yeah,
from what I've been playing with, you have to take out the either Tyler's Tracker or Random Up Excavator, whichever you prefer, for the land, which I guess in that case you would just take out the Tireless Tracker, and then you would put in a Scrub Ranger over a Mana Dork, because you can buy back the Thespian Stage and Dark Depths with the Random Up Excavator, and you would just play that like kind of being able to untap your moms and your knights more efficiently that way than having to rely on like tapping your knight and playing a Mother Runes that turn and not having any follow up
yeah.
if they have a
Yeah.
removal spell.
Yeah.
Well, Scrub Ranger lets you assemble the combo right away because you can just like get both the lands. But yeah, I find I do love Scrub Ranger. I think it's one of the most fun options that this entire like segment of the metagame has to offer, because it's just like, how much text is on that card for 2 mana? Like,
Yeah.
But a lot of times it does end up being kind of like a win more card. But at the same time, sometimes maybe you need more flyers in your deck, and it's an excellent flyer. It blocks Delver all day long.
Yeah. Also blocks Leovold very well.
And can't be blocked by, well, I guess, True Name. It flies over True Name.
Also getting it's like Belfast Strix and a bunch of other things, like the whole Merfolk deck for I'm sorry whoever plays that, and a bunch of cool stuff. It's a very fun card, and like you said, Mike, it's got so much text on it for having 2 mana. It's just one of those great utility creatures that you get in Maverick, as opposed to having Death and Taxes as like a Sanctum Prelate, stuff like that.
Well, I think this discussion of Scrub Ranger kind of makes a nice ending point for a discussion of this segment of decks, because the fact that we can be sitting here talking about all these different cards we could potentially be playing, and how Scrub Ranger is really fun, but you don't have to be on that. It's not something you necessarily find with any other archetype. If you're a Delver player, you probably have like 56 plus cards in your deck are set already.
Yeah.
So if you're a player who really enjoys doing fair things, but having a lot of play to your deck, and also having the opportunity to really customize and tweak your deck to your liking, I think this whole segment is a good place for you to be playing in.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, guys, I'm glad we got to come on. Before we wrap things up, I had a couple quick announcements not related to Night of the Reliquary that I wanted to go into. I know, but again, I think it was a good discussion. Hopefully, we convert some people to playing Maverick or Agrolome. Couple quick things. The guys in Houston have been doing a season-long bi-weekly vintage event, and they are wrapping up the season. So on December 16th, they're going to be streaming their invitational championship for that. So
Nice.
if anyone's into vintage, check that out. It'll be a good time. I might be going to that myself. I haven't played in any of the season, but I think I just get like an honorary invite to it. So I'll go and get stomped by them. But yeah, so if you're into vintage, definitely check that out. Likewise, on that note, we're going to be announcing our next Austin vintage event shortly. I'm working with Patrick Vincent and Brian Tweedy on it, and I think we're going to be doing them at breweries moving forward. And we'd also like to kind of make it into a year-long series where we'll do them every 4 to 8 weeks and then have a championship at the end of the year. So
that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it'll be great. It's if you're in Austin, you want to play some vintage, go for it. It's going to be 100% proxy. It'll be really laid back, so it should be a good time. And lastly, I'm going to be going to GP Oklahoma City. Or Johnny, I think you said you might be there too.
Yeah, man, I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to possibly be jamming some Green White Company, which is as close as I can get to Maverick and Modern.
Yeah.
I'm going to be jamming that up there because my girlfriend really wants to go up there, so I'm going to be doing that.
Yeah, so I'm going to go and play Scred in the main event.
Nice.
But yeah, Jess and I have this like tentative goal of seeing all 50 states, and one of them we haven't been to yet is Oklahoma. So we are, we're gonna go. I'll play in the main event, but
quote unquote treat. I'm just kidding. I can't really cast aspersions, although I have driven through the state a couple of times.
Expectations are very low. What do you do there? Is barbecue the thing? Like I don't know what Oklahoma has.
I don't think they have a really big thing going on over there. I mean, it's kind of like a very kind of niche city. There's not a lot of. It's very bland from what I know. Like there's not like whenever I hear people going on vacations, I never hear anybody saying, "Yeah, we're gonna go to Oklahoma." It's more like we're gonna go to Oklahoma because my grandparents live there.
Yeah,
I'm in the oil industry and I need to go do pipeline training. Yeah. Is Scott Pruitt from there, the head of the EPA now?
He was the what was his position? Was he a senator? I don't know.
Something like that.
He's just some piece of shit. I don't know.
Don't like him, no.
Yeah, so I'll be there. But Johnny, hopefully I'll see you there. Hopefully we get paired round one and draw.
That'd be fun, man.
Round one.
But yeah, guys, thanks for coming on. Are you guys gonna be at Legacy this week?
Yeah, you can catch me there, man. It'll be a lot of fun to see you guys.
For sure. Let's all play night.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Yep.
Thanks, man. Thank you for having us.
Later.
Bye.